You are watching DHTV from California State University, Dominguez Hills.
Okay, so this is part two of Reconstruction. Now, previously we understood the Black Codes. The Black Codes denied African Americans civil rights. In fact, there were several riots, rebellions, race riots really, in Memphis and New Orleans, as frustrated whites are going to go against the black civil rights movement. Northerners who took over both houses of Congress in 1866 will begin to introduce what is known as radical Reconstruction. So an asserted Congress under the radical Republicans are going to take over control of the readmission of states. So to ensure the future of the Republican Party, what's very important is to understand radical Reconstruction. Radical Reconstruction, the rapid advancement of the freedmen and the exclusion of the old Southern leadership from politics had to occur. So these are very intense times. And Thaddeus Stevens and Charles Sumner, Thaddeus Stevens in the House of Representatives and Charles Sumner in the Senate, they are key advocates for Black Lives Matter. While Thaddeus Stevens opposed black suffrage because he thought rich planters would use their economic power to control the vote, Charles Sumner is going to convincingly argue that the freedmen needed the vote for their own protection. But the idea was to rid the South of the Black Codes. Segregation, no ownership of land, fees to enter a trade, get rid of all of these. So while President Johnson is returning property to former planters, radical Republicans are going to use the Freedmen's Bureau to counteract the Black Codes. Now let's just take a look at what happened in one instance to an agent from the Freedmen's Bureau in Upper Louisiana. Let's go to that film clip.
That same fall, 9 black soldiers and their white captain climbed aboard a sternwheeler in New Orleans and headed upriver. The captain, Marshall Twitchell, was a career soldier from Vermont who had led black troops during the war. He had fought at Antietam, Fredericksburg, the Wilderness, and just about every other major battle in the East.
Twitchell is one of those Union veterans who enlist in the first year of the war and stays the duration. He's wounded several times. He gets a minie ball right in his face. It cuts a groove around his face and exits behind his ear. He'll have the scar for the rest of his life.
The war was over, and Twitchell was restless. In New Orleans, he got himself a commission in the Freedmen's Bureau. In the chaotic post-war South, the job of the Freedmen's Bureau agent was to smooth the transition from slavery to freedom. The Bureau built schools for the former slaves and fed and clothed war refugees, black and white. Twitchell was posted to Bienville Parish in northern Louisiana, a place he knew nothing about.
Here he is on a sternwheeler heading up the Red River. This region had never been conquered, so he's entering the last part of the Confederacy to surrender. It is dangerous, exotic, it's isolated, and he doesn't know it. But he is entering what is probably the most violent place in America. It's no coincidence that Harriet Beecher Stowe chose to put the final brutal ending of Uncle Tom's Cabin, where Uncle Tom is beaten to death by Simon Legree. It's no coincidence that she puts it on the upper Red River. It's a violent region.
I was without telegraphy, railway, or water connections, remembered Twitchell. If I'd known beforehand what my position was to be, I should have remained with my regiment. At the courthouse in Sparta, the county seat, Captain Twitchell set up office as the sole Freedmen's Bureau agent for the parish. He soon discovered his new neighbors were as hardened to battle as he was.
My great-grandfather had 2 brothers killed in the war and another wounded, and I'm named after one of them. There wasn't a family here that didn't lose somebody to the war. But in our little area, these veterans were never defeated, and that is a lot of the feeling here. The war just ended, and so everybody went home. And up into the midst of this came Twitchell.
The people in the area are wary. They don't quite know what to expect. But they quickly discover that this Freedmen's Bureau agent is somebody that they're going to have to deal with.
Agents like Twitchell had military authority to settle labor disputes and conflicts between former slaves and masters.
Planters certainly resented this intrusion into so sensitive an area. They wanted direct control over black laborers. They didn't want some Yankee Freedmen's Bureau agent there questioning their behavior, actually sitting them down and having them testify. And for the freedmen, here was somebody that they could go to if they were mistreated. He can't fundamentally change the economic lives of these people. All they can do is try to be a mediator, to give them some degree of justice.
Twitchell would soon learn that for a Yankee officer all alone in Northwest Louisiana, even a degree of federal justice might be too much.
Okay, as we can see, there's much tension with regards to implementing black civil rights through the Freedmen's Bureau. Now, the passage of the 14th Amendment ensured Negro suffrage, yet Johnson opposed the amendment and immediately replaced military officers serving as agents in the Freedmen's Bureau who showed themselves too enthusiastic in the freedmen's cause. And the passage of the Tenure of Office Act, as you're going to be reading in the textbook, expressly intended to keep Johnson from appointing or replacing members in his cabinet while the Senate was out of session. Johnson could not replace those who opposed his views on Reconstruction. So throughout Reconstruction, Southerners are going to oppose anything that is introduced to assist blacks improving their lives. So Southerners oppose tax systems. They oppose penal codes. They oppose women's rights. They oppose programs of economic recovery. And they labeled those Northerners who held office in the new Southern governments as carpetbaggers. They gave them a derogatory name. And any white, usually it was poor whites, who sided with the new regime, they stereotyped them and named them scalawags. Now, Johnson is going to become impeached. He will be impeached for going against the Tenure of Office Act. And the reason why was he offered Ulysses S. Grant a position in his cabinet so as to ensure his control of rule in the South. But the Senate refused to recognize Grant's position. And besides, Grant withdrew after the radicals informed him that he could be a potential presidential candidate for the Democratic Party, for the Republican Party. Now, Johnson is embarrassed, but he is saved because the person to replace Grant was incompetent. But under the radical Reconstruction, under the radical Republican era, the 15th Amendment is passed forbidding states to deny the right to vote to blacks. So let's take a look at the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments to the Constitution. These amendments, these 3 amendments to the Constitution are important for us to remember in this course because they all address specifically the issue of involuntary immigration and for the first time defined citizenship in the United States. Now, involuntary immigration, what is that? That is slavery. Involuntary immigration, that is human trafficking. And that's exactly what the United States practiced, was human trafficking. So the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments to the Constitution are very important, especially the 14th Amendment. The 14th Amendment first intended to secure rights for former slaves. It includes the due process and the equal protection clauses. These are most important. The amendment provides also a broad definition of United States citizenship, superseding the U.S. Supreme Court's decision in Dred Scott versus Sanford that had excluded slaves that were imported from Africa and their descendants. The amendment requires states to provide equal protection under the law to all persons within their jurisdiction. And it was used in the 20th century. It will be used in the 20th century to dismantle racial segregation in the United States, as in Brown versus Board of Education. But most importantly is its due process clause. This has been the basis of much important and controversial case law regarding privacy rights, especially with regards to women. And do women have the rights to their own body? Now also, it's about the rights of corporations. It is now used to protect corporations. So when we take a look at the 13th Amendment, it bans slavery, it bans human trafficking, it bans involuntary servitude. The 14th Amendment guarantees citizenship and due process and rights to all. And then there's the 15th Amendment. It bans race-based voting qualifications. So the next period of Reconstruction is known as Grantism. When Ulysses S. Grant will become president. And when Grant became president, he's going to turn his back on Reconstruction. He's going to allow the states to control their own destiny. Historians identify this period of Reconstruction as the Grantism. Under Grantism, we see the rise of terrorism in the form of the Ku Klux Klan. And for Grant, that was a state problem, not a federal concern. Hence Grantism. During the Grant era, the white South became very unruly under Republican control. The presence of blacks in legislatures and the corruption of Grant's cabinet allowed whites to condemn Negro rule. The planter class is going to blame the corruption on the experiment of political equality. And so Grant's administration that was totally corrupt, that was involved in just tremendous amounts of theft of the public good, is going to be blamed. African Americans will be blamed for that, because all you had to do was experiment on political equality for blacks and you get all of this corruption. So the planter class is going to go before the poor whites, all right, and try to get them to rebel against their poverty situation because of the political experiment of black equality. So poor whites are going to be inundated with information that's saying to them that they have their problems because they had to give rights to blacks. And the planter class is going to encourage poor whites to rebel by creating the Ku Klux Klan. And the Ku Klux Klan will then be organized as units in southern states. And with the growth of the KKK, black voters became intimidated, loyal whites are going to be attacked, and black organizations are going to be destroyed. If you were a successful black businessman or an entrepreneur, and those blacks who resisted the codes, you will be lynched. So Grant turned his back on black suffrage because he had to cover up for all of the corruption in his administration. He was more interested in civil service reform than black civil rights. He restored political rights to all former candidates, and under his watch, the Democratic Party will gain a majority in the House of Representatives and will improve their standing in the Senate. The planter class will come back. Now, most of the states in the Midwest and the West were safe for Republicans. So the South, as far as their political strategy under Grant, was no longer essential for Republican control of the federal government. As you will learn soon in future chapters, after Reconstruction, in the West, Native peoples defeated the U.S. military in key battles. This humiliated Grant. You will see that farmers are going to feel the pinch of the decline in commodity prices, and they will begin to organize. Farmers disliked the Republican program of protective tariffs. So there was a spirit of greedy materialism that fostered corruption at every level of government, because after the Civil War, the idea was markets, 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 and let's go make money. And so the spirit of greedy materialism fostered corruption at every level of government. State funds were transferred to private accounts of land assessors and political machines. Working classes experienced a decline of wages. There occurred a drop in agricultural prices. And then in 1873, a depression occurred, and it impacted society in tremendous ways. So there was a huge number of political scandals that occurred, and President Grant was busy trying to help those caught evade punishment. So, in Grant's last administration, the Republicans adopted what will be known as laissez-faire economics. And what are laissez-faire economics? Laissez-faire is a French word meaning leave alone. Less government is better government. Let the states develop the way they want. Leave alone, period. No restrictions. Let the states do what they want with blacks. Let the states do what they want with Native peoples, with Asians coming in to build the Transcontinental Railroad, with Mexicans being recruited to build the U.S. Southwest, with the natural resources. The federal government will guide the course of railroad operations, of industrial development, and of labor recruitment. So the federal government under Republican rule will intervene in the economy only in terms of internal improvements. In other words, to connect markets. The federal government will intervene in the economy only to assist the railroads to ensure that they connect these markets. The federal government will intervene in the economy only on behalf of industry to protect their industry through the protective tariffs in order to speed up productivity. So, just as the United States compromised on slavery and eventually found itself in a civil war, this country will enter into a compromise again and eventually find itself in a civil rights movement for change. Let's take a look at the compromise of 1877. The presidential election of 1876 pitted Samuel J. Tilden, a Democrat from New York, against Ohio Republican Rutherford B. Hayes. Now, Tilden won the popular vote, but the Electoral College was held hostage by Southern Democrats who held back their votes because they didn't like either candidate. Southern Democrats offered Hayes political support in the disputed election for firm Republican commitment to home rule. They wanted Hayes to abandon the freedmen and get rid of carpetbaggers, scalawags, and radicals. They wanted nullification of the 14th and 15th Amendments to the Constitution and the Civil Rights Act. Hayes only promised them the withdrawal of federal troops from the South and would allow Southern governments to be controlled by ex-Confederates. So Hayes guaranteed for them home rule. And that home rule is going to last for 80 years until the Civil Rights Movement challenged the Compromise of 1877, the Civil Rights movements of the 1850s and 60s. The result of the 1950s and 1960s, The result was the granting of the Electoral College votes to Rutherford B. Hayes. Rutherford B. Hayes, Rutherford be president. Let's visit a PBS documentary on Reconstruction and let's appreciate the compromise.
Grant saw that support for Reconstruction was eroding, so he decided to pull back on military interventions in the South to enhance his party's chances in the North. With the next presidential election months away, Washingtonians, black and white, came together to honor a past president, Abraham Lincoln. For one man, the occasion afforded an unprecedented national platform for a call to action.
On April 14, 1876, this plaza near Capitol Hill was teeming with people, including members of both houses of Congress, the Supreme Court justices, and the President of the United States, Ulysses S. Grant. The crowd had gathered here on the 11th anniversary of Lincoln's assassination to witness the unveiling of this monument honoring his crowning achievement, the Emancipation Proclamation.
The most memorable words spoken that day were those of Frederick Douglass.
Truth compels me to admit, even here in the presence of the monument, Abraham Lincoln was not our man. He was preeminently the white man's president. You are the children of Abraham Lincoln. We are best his stepchildren. To you, it especially belongs to preserve and perpetuate his memory and commend his example.
When he says Abraham Lincoln was a white man's president, you go, whoa, that is an amazing thing to say in front of the most powerful politicians in the Republic in the year 1876. It's shocking.
Yeah, it's a presidential election year. It appears that Reconstruction is unraveling. He used this opportunity to make a speech about the responsibility of the U.S. government, which was sitting right in front of him, to hold together whatever was left of Reconstruction if they could.
There's this understanding in 1876 that blacks have all the rights now that they should expect. We have the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments. The Republican Party, it's become a party of large financiers, corporate men, and captains of industry. Now let's focus on the economy.
When Republicans cast around for a likely candidate, Rutherford B. Hayes seems to be the man. He finished the war as a Union general. But by the time he becomes governor of Ohio, he has begun to pull back on black equality. He's untainted by corruption, which will be extremely valuable because Samuel Tilden is running almost entirely on an anti-corruption platform as a Democrat. But Hayes is also bland enough that he will offer no objection to anyone. He is a first-rate, second-rate man.
Both candidates pledged that they would bring Reconstruction to an end.
Election night is complete and utter confusion.
Even though Tilden won the popular vote, the results from Florida, South Carolina, and Louisiana, where African Americans faced severe violent repression, were undetermined.
Republicans convinced Southern governments to declare enough votes invalid to swing the Electoral College to Hayes.
The Democrats were so outraged by the fact that Tilden was not declared the winner that they began to rally their voters under the slogan, Tilden or Blood. There were real fears of a civil war. Grant started to call in troops to guard Washington. And he said, either party can afford to lose an election, but we as a people cannot afford to have a presidential election that is tainted by false or illegal results. Congress created a bipartisan commission that declared Hayes the winner by one vote.
Democrats predictably cried foul.
Hayes was referred to as rather Fraud v. Hayes. He was called his fraudulency.
February, as Inauguration Day neared, the election still remained undecided. Republicans and Democrats came together and cut a deal. Hayes is inaugurated as President of the United States.
It's hard to imagine, in the moment of an election, a party trading a presidential victory, unless it means protecting their way of life. White supremacy is a long-term campaign. It was more important to reinstate that power structure than it was to win the White House.